All right, so I want to officially welcome you to Shepherd's Haven 2026 and give a very quick background of this. Just for starters, how many of you this is your first year here? I'm seeing 8 or 10. That's we welcome you in a special way. We're not going to be stand up and sing or anything like that, but just welcome. You went through it before, so we don't have time this year. Romans is a longer book. But we do welcome you in a special way, and I'm actually excited. I see several of our young fellows here, and so we're glad you guys are with us. We're trying to kind of promote that, and it's building a little bit to invest a lot of our sons and young men from our churches and invest in them. So we welcome all of you. Real quick, brief history. This whole concept started, and I'm not sure which direction it is, but somewhere here within about a mile, half a mile of here, in a house, a regular house. And some of you have been with us that long, but it was about 26 or 27 years ago. My count's off because of COVID. That stalled us the 1 year. But we started in a little house in a living room with about 8 or 12 of us for the first few years. And if you catch any of the veterans and ask stories there's some neat stories from way back there. And then we moved to a different house on campus here. And then about 8 or 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that, we moved into this facility. And this is what we've been using. Great facility for the conference room. Most of the rooms are in the next floor up. And right overhead is the cafeteria. So when we have meals, we'll be right overhead, and that works out great. But about 26, 27 years ago, my dad, Dr. Ken Brown, and us brothers had come up with the idea of just getting some guys together, talking theology, working in the text. And so we've continued that. Dad's been gone, I think, 20 years now. And we inherited from him a real love of the scriptures. And so in this, you'll find this, especially I'm kind of speaking to the new guys, you'll find this is a pretty unique conference. We do really stress encouraging one another in the fellowship. We recognize that, and by we I mean the leadership team. That was one of the changes from the early days. It was mostly the brothers who did it. About 8 years ago, something like that, 9 years ago, we kind of put together what we call a leadership team. My 3 older brothers and brother-in-law were the core of it, are still the core of it. And they have so much experience. We've had some statements about one of them actually, we think, because we did a session on law and grace a bit ago, and he spent some time with Moses, so he had some background in the law stuff. But those fellows have a lot of experience, and then because of that, we decided we ought to get some younger guys with enthusiasm and with energy, and so we brought on 3 other fellows, the younger group, and so you'll get to meet them. It's Tim, Brian, and Sean are the young fellas. And somehow I got stuck in the middle, so I got asked to do like all the organizing of the materials. The whole team does a lot of stuff, so that part's been great. But anyways, from Dad and our own ministries, we recognize the need for fellowship from time to time. In fact, pretty regularly. Some of you minister out on kind of the outskirts of civilization or whatever. You don't have a lot of fellowship. We know that. We have been there in our groups, and so we want to be here to fellowship and encourage you along the way. And then the same thing, not just the leadership guys, but all of you at different stages. We have been through collectively difficult things in ministry, and so I would be shocked if there wasn't somebody here who was coming in discouraged or hurting or something. I would be very shocked if that weren't the case among this group. And we want you to know we're here to be your friend and pray with you and spend time. And even just being in the Word of God is a refreshment. But we understand that. And then one of the big things, this is probably the heart of this conference, is that we inherited from our dad, and we try to do it ourselves. And that's what we're here to do, is spend time in the Word of God. And so we picked up from Dad and from our own journeys in academia, exegetical tools and different things like that. So we want to emphasize some of that. And we recognize there's a whole range of levels of background, so we try and touch a little bit on all that. Some of you have limited Greek skills or none. We do try and bring out some things in the languages. Some of you are fairly advanced, and so we hope we can point a few things just to think about new. So we try and cover a little bit of all of that. With that being said, we welcome you to this conference and the book of Romans that we've entitled Justified Living. And we're going to expand on that theme. And it's my privilege to kind of introduce that. So let me work forward. We're going to go until 4:50, and then it'll be just about time to eat. So we have about 45 minutes to go. I want to use the analogy of a toolbox for this conference. I don't know if the other guys will pitch in that way, but that's part of what we're doing. We want to encourage you to use your study tools, your exegetical tools, the other language tools, wherever you are, and whatever level you're at. It doesn't hurt to brush up on it. And so in your toolbox, your study toolbox, from college or seminary or somewhere, you might have a couple tools you forgot about. And you haven't been using them much, and they're in the bottom of the toolbox. And we'd like to rattle that box a little bit this week and let you think about, hey, maybe that would help. Maybe I should get that out once in a while, blow the dust off, and use it. For me, I've got two categories. I'm calling them here text tools and study tools. The text tools, this isn't all of them, but this is the kind of thing that I'll crisscross with, other of the men will do as well. But the text itself, we're working in the text. The text itself is not just the tool, it is the material we're working with. But that would include even reading it well. If you're able to read it in Greek, or at least work at it reading in Greek, we would encourage that. The context, the grammars, the lexicons, things like word studies and word frequency studies and so on. And then structure, like diagramming and rhetorical analysis and discourse analysis, those kind of things. We'll touch on a little bit here and there. And we want to emphasize those. In academic terms, these are closer to your primary sources. And so doing your own work. We certainly all use the study tools, the secondary level tools of study Bibles and commentaries and surveys and the things that are listed here, maps and background resources. That's why we want to encourage you to do that. Be laborious students, work hard in the text. That's why we want to go that. So with that in mind, let's grab our toolbox and jump into the text. My purpose in these minutes here in this opening session is to cover the first 17 verses of chapter 1, which is essentially the introduction, but also to give a broad picture of the landscape. And so I'm trying to give some things, outlining the whole book and so on, but also see a little bit in the first 15, 17 verses of chapter 1. And so we want to do that. I have been known in some of our sessions, some of our years, when we're studying a particular book, to actually take the introduction and read the entire book. I'm not going to do that with Romans today. I didn't test it out, but that'd take a little longer than I want to put into it for our purposes of time constraints. But we have here the first 15 verses on there. And I think I was going to read this. You're hopefully familiar with the text. But we're going to look at this in different ways. We're going to take some of the tools out of the toolbox and work on this here for a few moments. And then I'm going to spread it out, take some of those same tools and spread out over the whole book and do that. By the way, in reading, and I imagine some of you do better than I do, and some of you I want to encourage you, when you're preparing Bible studies, sermon series, messages, and so on, reading the text more than once, becoming quite familiar with it is very important. And I think I had more than one teacher that recommended, when possible, it isn't always possible, there are some weeks that don't give way to this, but when possible, at least a couple of your readings, if you can read through the entire book in one sitting. So if you're preaching Philemon, that's not bad. Romans takes a little bit longer, but there is something about seeing the flow of the whole book, and that's partly what I'm going to do here in a minute with the outlines and stuff. But if you can read the whole book, it gets really hard in Psalms or Isaiah. That takes a little bit longer. But with that in mind, here's the text. And again, I recognize it's probably too small. You can probably read that. I'm not going to do anything with it this second. I've actually shrunk it down so it's still there, and we're going to apply very quickly introductory materials. Is that the right font size? Are we good, Tim? All right. All right, yeah. The part that's important is in the blue box there. All right. Anyway, there's jokes behind stuff. You got to In the blue box, introductory matters, and there's more to it than these, but I've just listed the simple ones. You would draw these from both reading the introduction in the text itself and from most any standard study Bible, good commentary, New Testament introduction or survey. But you'd obviously get the authors, Paul. The audience is mixed, and I think maybe one or two of the guys in the other sessions may cover. There's some Jew-Gentile issues going on. And so there's a mixed audience, and there's some historical background. A couple of the other guys might draw that in. That's not my main emphasis here in this session. Date, somewhere around 56 to 60, and I think that's a mistype. 56 to 58, I think, is the date, not 68. And probably written from when Paul was in Corinth. And there are 3 or 4 occasions or purposes. Introducing himself has been suggested. The Jew-Gentile tension, that the fact that he wanted to go to Spain might be part of it. He was going to visit them and then continue on. And then certainly, and this is the one I'm going to hit a little bit more, I think all those may be part of why he wrote. But the gospel is going to be central. And you'll see that in a minute as we develop it. The genre, it's an epistle, and so that has its own features, different than narrative or legal, Old Testament legal or poetry. This is epistle. This is very Pauline, and it's very theological. Indeed, that's one of the challenges in this conference. We quite often cover a 4 or 6 chapter book with some level of depth in the time we have. A 16 chapter book that is denser theologically than a lot of them. We're obviously going to do not surface level, but there's going to be chunks that are going to happen. And so I trust you'll be encouraged with that and realize that's what's happening. And then the purpose, themes, genre, and structure, I'm going to develop that in the next screen. So let's go to that and work on one feature. This is one that's interesting to me. Here I've just put the principle or the general idea of block diagramming. And the way we were taught way back a long time ago was what I call stick diagramming. With the line, and you put the subject and the verb and all that. How many of you remember stick diagramming? Yeah, that was tedious. It was very useful, and I almost thought about putting a screen up just to show it, but it was very useful. But the problem is, if you're preaching 5 or 6 verses, let alone 15 or 18 or 20 verses, a stick diagram goes on multiple pages, and you lose track of where your sticks are. And so that's it. I still think for those of you who use it, if you utilize it, it's very good for detail work inside of a smaller text. I was introduced 10, 15 years ago to block diagramming, and essentially what you're doing, in short, is you're finding the main statement, you're finding main verbs, main clauses, and visually you represent the connections by indenting. So in this one, there's whatever it is, there's some kind of main idea or sentence or statement, and it'll be a whole phrase, a whole clause. Typically, it's the main verb. You're going to look for the main verb and the subject. That's going to be the whole phrase, and then you indent things that support it. So again, there's more detail to this. I'm just giving a quick run-by, a quick flyby, but you're going to utilize subordinating conjunctions. Participles often do this kind of thing. Other connective words that indicate this is a support. So Paul makes some kind of statement, Jesus Christ is Lord of all. And then he might make 2 supporting statements. Because, like a hati, because he is the creator. And then he might say, and hati, because he is the king of the universe. And that you would understand those explain, those further the argument, those support what he's saying. And Paul, he might go 3 or 4 or 5 layers deep. He does that sometimes. Once in a while you catch him, he's like, wait, this isn't under anything. This is a parenthetical over here. So that's what happens. And so that's the gist of it. I find, especially if I write small or use Word and use small font, I can put a whole passage on, and in one page, this is how I function. If I can see the whole thing and realize there's two main statements, there are 2 main ideas, and there's 3 supporting things in the first one. And I love it. This helps me with exegetical outlining. I love it if the first main statement has 3 participles underneath it. So you're looking for equality. In fact, part of what you're doing visually here is in this particular sample diagram, because these are at the same margin, you're saying these are of equal weight. And the supporting underneath it, these are of equal weight. That should be number 3 here, by the way. And then there's an indentation, a little more explanation there. Does that make sense? And that helps me visually. I commend this to you to see. I'm going to show a couple examples along the way. But it helps me to see it visually. And part of what would happen here, by the way, homiletically, as you're preparing a sermon, is if you were preaching this section here, this is probably going to be something like your title or your theme statement or your summary statement, something like that. And then these are going to be your Roman numerals. You're going to expand on those. That is something like that. Something in that vein is going to be there. And so let me give you an example. I've done a very simplified one out of Romans 1, the first half. And so it's very simple. I've not filled in all the words because of space on the screen. And when I go below a certain font size, I get looks from the back, so I have to be careful. But here we have three things. Verses 1 to 7 is the first paragraph, and it starts with Paul, the servant, and then there's going to be several things, called to be an apostle, and so on. There's another paragraph here, 8 to 15, and we have this, first I thank my God, and then a couple verses we're going to spend time on here in a moment. We're going to actually focus in on these 2 verses momentarily. But here's the outline paragraph-wise of the first 17 verses. This is how it breaks out. Let me take you a step further with that. And this is what the kind of things you're looking for. And so in the toolbox, these would include, if you had commentaries, some of them will list this kind of thinking. But if you're doing some of your own work, you're going to be looking for these kind of conjunctions. You're going to be looking for words that indicate this is where a new thought starts. This is where a paragraph begins and develops the one before it. And so there's a couple of them here. The first one is there's just a greeting formula. This is just kind of an epistolary issue. There's no special conjunction there, but it's an epistolary formula. When we get to verse 18, the clue here is the proton me, first. And it's kind of, it indicates I'm going to talk about this sort of new paragraph. And there's a subordination here. This comes under it, the hati. I thank my God, such and such. Why? Hati, because your faith is proclaimed. And so this is an example. And the paragraph continues, of course. I'm just shortening here. In verses 16 and 17, we actually have a series of gars, G-A-R, gar statements that mean 4. But that introduces 16 and 17. And we're going to deal with 16 and 17 in a little more detail in just a moment. So allow me to move forward with that and look at our next slide here. We're going to look in the next few slides on some things with outlining. I'm going to take it to the book for a moment so you get a little big picture, an outline, a structure, and some themes. And there's some interesting, so I've put a fair amount of time in this, really enjoyed the study. I was telling, I think, Lawrence or a couple of you, like, I wish I'd had about 4 more weeks uninterrupted to put some more stuff together, but here we are. So what I've given you here, this is actually pretty close to the outline we're using here, and each guy might have it slightly different. Yours might be a little different. I would submit if you're way off of this one, you would be outside the consensus of most scholars. So there are 1 or 2 things that might be different, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections that are here. These are the major sections. That are lined up. This is pretty good. And I'm dealing with that first one in a little bit of detail. I'm trying to cover the whole book in a broad introductory way. But in the chapter 1 through first half of chapter 3 is the issue of universal sin. And there's some heavy things. Some of the other guys, I think we have 2 more sessions, I think it's tomorrow maybe, that are going to deal with those sections. Lawrence and I are going to cover in chapter 3 and 4 justification. That is a major issue in the book. So dealing with that, we're going to develop. In chapters 5 to 8, there's some things with life in Christ. And there's some developments there that are different than what has happened before that. And then, of course, Israel and God's plan. I think we have 2 or 3 or 4 sessions on that. And then it finishes up with a practical exhortation. And this is fairly normal for Paul. He'll develop doctrinal stuff early and then develop practical exhortations towards the end. And so we're going to be pretty close to that. If you use this as your outline, I would say you're on track. Not that you need my approval, but it does line up pretty well. Let me take you one step further with this and show you this is why. So this same outline, but I've included the things you're looking for, the things that mark it. And so in this first one, we already said it opened in the introduction with an epistolary greeting and then had some following paragraphs. Next major section, there is the issue of agar plus it's revealed. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven. But that gar, so we have a conjunction and a section that develops it. There's a major one of the bigger hinge points at 321 that's going to develop justification. And it's now then, nuni de, now then. And he'll develop, and it's a change in subject and introduction of new material. And he's moved on to a new chapter in his letter. We have an un in chapter 5 that is indicative, and the subject material changes, and it's a therefore or then. In chapter 9, we have Aletheon Lego. I say this truly. I say this that I want you to hear. And then another un. And just to be clear, there are many more uns and gars in the text. These are not the only ones. So it's not like you spot one un and like, oh, that's the major change. This sets it off, so you're looking for it, and you look through and you find material that's changing, the subject material. And so that's what we're working on. One of the things I've worked on this time a little bit different. I do it in different ways, and I utilize Logos. I'm guessing about half of you do and half of you don't. There are a lot of tools in Logos. I'm not here to sell you Logos, so I thought about showing you stuff in Logos. I'm going to just show you the results of it. In the next couple screens, what I did is use one of the features in Logos, and you could do it manually, a la Strong's. I mean, you could do it that. It would take you a while. Or I'm sure Accordance or some of the other ones, I'm sure have this kind of a feature. But this is a word frequency count. I have two screens. They're both intentionally small, just to show you that you can do it. And what I've done here is I've narrowed it to Romans. I'm searching on lemmas, on roots, if you will, on lemmas of Greek terms in Romans. And I filtered off all the conjunctions. I'm doing nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. So I'm cutting off the and that kind of stuff. So it narrows it down. And there are two screens. This isn't all of them. There's a lot more. But it goes from the highest count in the book. It's theos, or God, at 153 counts and so on. You don't need to memorize this. I'm just showing you that it's available. And what it does is as you skim through this, you begin to see, especially in the upper screens, like theos is there, namas. If your eyes are pretty adept, you can, if I can find my mouse, there it is. Here's namas, the third one, and it's 74 times in the book. And does that mean the book is about law? Not necessarily, but Paul's going to put it in the book a lot. So something's going on. That'd be something to figure out. We've got sin, hamartia. We've got the Lord. We've got faith, pistis, 40 times. And you would skim through this and see, like, oh, these are some things that are interesting. And you probably begin forming, like, there may be some theme or subject material he's dealing with, obviously, because he's putting it in here. If you took the list all the way down, you found something where there's a word found once or twice, it's not that it's not important, but in the scope of the book, probably not so much. Does that make sense? So let me take you a step further on this. I have the same screen, take it down further, a whole bunch more. I'm down to 9. Abraham occurs 9 times in the book. So what I'm doing with that I took it all the way down to katergeo, which is to use up or exhaust, all the way down to 6 usages. What I did is I went through and I did that. I visually scanned, and with having studied some and read some and a little knowledge of Romans, I made a list that it seemed important to me. High frequency words that stand out to me. And so I included law. And as a side note, as you work through the book of Romans, law occurs 74 times. That's a lot. And I will tell you, my conclusion is it is not all Mosaic law. You get over, and I think it's chapter 8, you have the law of the Spirit of life. I don't think that's the Mosaic law. and so on. So there's going to be some further studying, but the word law shows up, the word sin. The word faith is in there 40 times. And that's an important one. Righteousness, of course, that's the word. You're going to have a whole family. I think Tim has a session on the decay family, that D-I-K-A, Ada, root, that's righteousness and justification and the different forms to declare, all those kind of things. That's a pretty big one. Spirit, flesh, grace, the verb to live, death, and believe. And by the way, faith and believe are the same Greek word, just one is a noun, one is a verb. And that makes it 61 times. Faith and belief, that's a pretty big subject. The verb reckon, the judge, the word life and live are both in there. So that's a pretty big one, 37 times. Gospel shows up, all right? And so this is some preliminary work, and you would probably, as you're just reading through, if you read through it multiple times and take a few notes and think and observe, you would probably begin to pick up on this. Where this becomes even more fascinating to me is to take it a step further, and I'll do that in just a minute, to pull this into a little bit more context and see where it's distributed. So it's not just a list of faith occurs 40 times, but where in the book does it occur? And so we'll get to that in just a minute. Here's this, I pulled this up from somebody else, a chiastic flow of 1 to 8. These are the kind of markers or structural things you're looking for. How many of you work with chiastic structures? I see a few of you are. It is found in the Old Testament a lot. It's in the New Testament as well. And I once you've discovered it, it's pretty fun. Have you noticed that once you get taught it a little bit, you're like, you kind of see them everywhere. And I'm not sure they do it every single time, but this one seems relatively solid. And so, the way, if those of you who are not as familiar with the chiastic structure, it's from the Hebrew chi, which is an X. And so, again, visually, we're marking it this way, like that. And what you're doing is you have corresponding outer elements, A and A1, B and B1, C and C1, and so on. And typically, the inner portion is the part that's being emphasized. That's part of the emphasis or the interpretive issue with the chiastic structure. So you can see that. These are all tools you can develop. I'm just surveying them real quickly. Let me take you to themes. All right. So we're now going to dig into verses 16 and 17 a little bit more, and this is the heart of this introductory session. Verses 16 and 17, as important as Paul's introduction and wanting to go to Spain and dealing with some of those things that I covered very inefficiently, very abbreviated. You'll need to do some more work on it if you're going to preach the book. I want to sit on verses 16 and 17 here for a little bit. And so this becomes a central issue in understanding the book, and there's a lot of things that are going to happen here. So allow me to develop this a little bit. Out of 16 and 17. What I want to do is do 2 or 3 things. From a run-through of these 2 verses, I want to point out a few exegetical tools. I want to look at the development potentially of an outline for the book, or at least some things with that, and pick out a theme. I think the theme for the book is found in these 2 verses. All right, so I read it this way. I'm just using ESV here. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. All right, and so I'm going to introduce some things maybe new to you, at least get you thinking on something. This is a fascinating couple of verses. Let me take you a step further. These are a collection of theme statements from different writers, and just pulled together here. So most of them, with one exception, it's the outlier, are pulling from these 2 verses. Most commentators, I'm guessing most of you have worked in Romans, you probably came out with 16 and 17 is pretty important. And so here are these 5 or 6. One, the righteousness of God revealed through justification by faith. Second one, the gospel as the power of God for salvation. Thirdly, a third option, justified believers live a new life under grace. Here's the outlier. I put it in there because he's drawing it from the middle of the book, which I guess you could do. But anyways, it's grace reigns through righteousness to life. He's not using 16 or 17. I don't know that's the strength. The righteousness of God revealed in the gospel and received by faith. The last one, the righteousness of God revealed in the gospel that justifies believers by faith and results in a transformed life. And so there's some things. And what we want to do is develop this verse for a few moments from 3 or 4 different angles, using 3 or 4 different tools. So these 2 verses. Number 1, these are the high impact words that I came up with of gospel, of salvation, of believe, of Jew and Greek, of righteousness, of faith, of righteous, and the word for to live. And so I want to point those out for just a few minutes. And this will be I'm going to suggest these are going to be expanded in the book. These are probably some major content that needs to be developed as you study through the book. The book will develop these things in different ways. And some of these will need to be defined a little bit better. So that you're clear and you're thinking of how you understand it as Paul's using it. Let me go through some of those tools in this book. Here's a block diagram, and for me, this begins to show some things. If you notice, I have only one statement of these 2 verses as the main statement. And he's developed the introduction. I'm Paul, I'm called of God, here's what I'm trying to do, and so on. And he says this, the main idea of this is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And so that becomes to me core in this. Somewhere in your theme statement of what he's trying to accomplish is some aspect of the gospel, something that has to do with the preaching of the good news. You'll notice my block diagram, and I feel pretty solid about this. I think it's on the right track. I have 2 supporting things. There are this first one, for I'm not ashamed, is a gar. This is a conjunction. And the other 2 also are gars. And the way I've laid it out is they're coordinate. They're subordinate to the first one, but the 2 of them are coordinate. There are 2 reasons why he's not ashamed of the gospel. One is, first of all, it's the power of God for salvation. In it, there is God's ability to accomplish what he wants with his word. And so he's not ashamed of the gospel because it's the power of God. And he goes on to say it to everyone who believes. So there's that aspect. And then the Jew, Gentile, to the Jew first and to the Greek also. And so there's something going on there. And then I notice a second, not only is he not ashamed of it because it's the power of God for salvation, he also is not ashamed of it because in it, and you link the it back to the gospel grammatically, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. And so something is going on here. This is the family of words, righteousness, that's going to involve justification. Being right with God, being declared righteous, and so on. That aspect is in this sentence. In the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And we want to continue working here. That's the block diagram. Let me give a few observations here of mine, and you can think on it and think on it later. Here's the verse. Here's some observations that I've come up with from this central verse, and that is the theme centers on the gospel somewhere, the gospel that brings salvation to all who believe. And so throughout the book, that's the broad sense that's going to happen. There's something about the gospel. And actually, I can't remember if I have an actual screen on this or not, but the word gospel doesn't occur a lot, 9 times, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. It occurs in this first chapter and occurs towards the end of the book. And it serves potentially as kind of a framework for what Paul's doing in total, in the aggregate here. Secondly, I noticed salvation, the word salvation in Romans. And here's my observation. This is more of my own personal one I've been working on. I'm not sure I still have it worked out perfectly. But I'm pretty sure that the word salvation, which occurs several times in Romans, and the word save, is probably not exactly equivalent to how we use it. So in our churches, in our evangelical circles, as we're preaching to people who need Christ and they need to be born again, we will at some point ask them, are you saved? And we mean by that, are you born again? Have you experienced Ephesians 2, 8, and 9? Have you put faith in Christ? I'm not sure. In fact, I'm pretty convinced that that's not how Paul is using it here in Romans. And I won't fully develop it here, but I have a lot of questions. One of the first starting ones is, it appears that the salvation is, in the very next verse, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven. And there's something about that is a present tense. It is even now, God is pouring out wrath, his anger on the sins. And of course, that's that passage. It's the downward spiral of evil in the world. And that God is actually, it's not the final judgment, it's not the eternal judgment, but it's something. He is angry, he is wrathful about it. And the salvation, I think, is connected to that somehow. How to exactly word it, I'm not positive, but I don't think salvation is exactly like Ephesians 2 salvation. I don't think salvation here in Romans is exactly like we talk about born again salvation. I think there's a little more to it, a different angle on it. And we recognize there are different aspects of salvation. There's some different applications, different time elements that are involved. And take it one step further, my observations, righteousness or justification that's revealed and manifested in the book. I think the justification that Paul develops here, he talks about that we're justified by faith apart from works of the law. I think that would be closer. That's probably Paul's Romans term for what you and I usually call salvation, to be born again or be saved from eternal punishment. In Romans, the one that matches most closely with that concept, I think, is justification. I'll let you think on it, and if you have questions, there are guys coming after me, you can ask them. How's that? Let me take it a step further. We do want to look here briefly. This is one I don't know the full answer for. So in that verse, we have this phrase, and I put here both the Greek and the English. For the righteousness of God in the gospel is being revealed, and then we have this phrase, out of faith, or from faith to faith, more literally, I guess, out of faith into faith. I'm not fully settled on what that is. At the least, the simplest one is that faith is involved from first to last. The faith undergirds the whole thing. That's the simplest, and that may be involved. There are two or three other considerations, two or three other interpretations. You can work on that. I don't have a full answer on that one at this point. So, ek pisteos, ace piston, out of faith, into faith. What exactly is going on there? The one that interests me a little bit more today is the next phrase. This is the final phrase of the verse, of verse 17. And I have the Greek and the English there so you can follow it. And it's the top line is the ESV, basically. The righteous will live by faith. I want to explore this for a few minutes. The Greek line there is the actual word order in the Greek. So hada dikaios ek pisteos zeisatai. And underneath it I put relatively literal translation. And the righteous one out of faith shall live. To me, this is fascinating and actually has some big implications in understanding the book of Romans. There's some tie-ins here that are very interesting to me. I trust it'll be something that you would consider and look at a little bit more. The biggest issue out of this is this. What do we do with the ek pisteos? The righteous one out of faith shall live. What do we do with that? What happens? And I don't know if some of you have worked on this. I imagine in a group this size you probably have. Here is the question. Does the out of faith go with the shall live? The green that's on the screen, unless you're colorblind. If not, if you are, then it's the upper right one. And the translation would be then the righteous will live by faith. Most of the translations have that. What I'm suggesting, and what I want to show a little bit of evidence for, is the ek pistos, the out of faith, actually, I think goes with the justification, with the righteous one. And so that would be the bottom translation, those who are righteous by faith. The by faith righteous ones shall live. And there's kind of a difference. Allow me to show a couple points that at least will interest you. You can do some more study of your own. I mean, that's partly what we're doing. The tools allow you to shape things, and we usually come out pretty similar, but sometimes we come out a little bit different. But here's where I'm coming down. This is my idea that the by faith righteous will live. Here's what I come up with. I've done some, not only the word counts, but I've done some distribution. So here we have a couple interesting things. We have pistis, or faith. And what I did is, again, this isn't Logos. I wish there's a better way to do it, but hopefully you can see this good enough. What these are, it's a bar chart by chapter. So I took the distribution of whatever the number was. I think it was 40. And I asked it to distribute it over the chapters. How many times in chapter 1, how many times in chapter 2, and so on. And so we're in chapter 1. It's mentioned there. That's 6. The numbers on the side are very small. You probably can't see them. There's 6 times. Here's what I find very interesting is that the bulk of the faith references are here. Chapter 3 and 4. What subject matter is being covered in chapter 3 and 4? Justification. We're justified by faith. The 2 references, at least one of them, in chapter 5 is the first verse. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, I don't remember off the top of my head the second one. There's nothing there that includes faith. There are references later on. But here's the next one. Here is same thing, a chapter distribution of the word zao or zoe. It's both, live or to live, life or to live. And you notice there's 1 in chapter 1. There's 1 in chapter 2. The chapter 1 is the righteous by faith will live. All right, so that's the reference. Here is justification. It's not in the chapters, but when we get to chapter 3, 4, 5, when we get to chapter 5 through 8, which I keep hitting the wrong button here. When we get through 5 through 8, it's found quite a bit, and that's the section that most of us would call life in Christ, living victoriously, sanctification, something like that. And so that lends credence. It's a very heavy argument for me that it is justified by faith. Those who are, Paul's going to tell them how they ought to live, what should happen in their Christian life. And so that was one that was very interesting to me. Let me move on. I have just a couple more things. And let's see what we've got. I put them together, by the way. So I put faith on top and living or life on the bottom. And they're lined up pretty good. Here is faith, and here is the bulk or a larger portion of life or living. So those are by chapters again. So this has struck me quite a bit. A couple last ones here. In fact, I think this is the last screen. Here's what I've come up with from this. Very similar to that original outline, the consensus outline. Almost exactly. So we have the salutation and salvation. We have a section in 1 through 3 that deals with condemnation, the judgment of God. God's wrath against sin is being poured out. And we'll develop those sessions here as we work through the conference. The middle section, major turning point, justification, God's righteousness in Christ by faith alone. Chapter 3, and I take it through chapter 5, verse 11. If you stop it at the end of 4, I'm not going to argue with you. I think there's a little bit of a linking section. And then the sanctification passage, the victorious living, where we find a lot of those. And then there's a passage on Israel, the explanation, kind of a parenthetical. And then the final one is Paul's normal thing of how to work this out, application, practical Christian living. And so I came up with this. I'm not sure it's my final form, but the theme is the powerful gospel that justifies by faith alone, and maybe you could say, and transforms the believer for victorious living. something like that. That's a work in progress, but that's kind of where I'm at. As we, on a couple more of my sessions, I'm going to do a little bit more of these word distributions, and I never found, if anyone knows in Logos how to do this, I'm trying to find a way to do clusters of words. I'm going to describe it for you, but I don't think I have a good graph on it. Because it's not just like faith is in chapter 3 and 4, there are some other words that hang around with it. It's not just life in chapters 5 through 8, there are some other words that hang around. So I'll describe it. If anyone knows how to do a graph that is, you can catch very easily visually, please see me. I'd love to figure out how to do that well, all right? Let me pause there.